Alberta Primetime with Michael Higgins.
Welcome to Alberta Primetime. Ahead tonight, our politics panel on the Smith government moving to limit medical assistance in dying. But first, addressing years of unpaid property taxes.
We'd like to see a lot of that repaid, but companies that don't exist, companies that are already in the wind-up process, companies that have already had bankruptcy processes begin and that have obligations to reclaim that land environmentally, we appreciate that a lot of that isn't going to come forward.
Messaging from the provincial government this week in partnering with rural municipalities on a new report for dealing with oil and gas companies that don't pay their property taxes. Overdue bills, the RMA says, have already pushed above $250 million. And joining us now, Kara Westerland, president of the Rural Municipalities of Alberta and a Brazil County councillor. Councillor Westerland, good to see you again. Welcome back.
Well, thank you so much for having me, and it's great to see you again.
All right. Well, and a few things to touch on in the wake of the RMA Spring Convention this week. But I have to think the big one, it's this joint plan with recommendations for ensuring oil and gas companies pay their taxes. What are the key tools here for you? How do you see them serving rural municipalities?
Well, before we get into that, I just want to say how excited we are. This task force had worked well over a year on putting the 17 recommendations forward. And what was different this time was that the province was at the table with us, along with industry and the AER. And actually, it was so unique that both RMA and the Municipal Affairs Office actually co-chaired the task force. So what we're hoping for after the big announcement on Monday and hundreds of hours worth of work over the last year and a bit, is that we're hoping to accomplish two broad goals. The first one is going to be obviously, the big easy one is to eliminate the non-payment of taxes moving forward. And second is to lead to accountability for and the recovery of existing arrears as much as possible. All right.
So now those are measures for going forward. So how satisfied is your membership then with this message that $250 million in unpaid property taxes will likely never be paid?
Well, it has been no secret. We knew that we would definitely struggle to collect the full amount. Often these companies are bankrupt, they're insolvent, and then, just quite frankly don't exist anymore. But I think what is really important message that we need to make sure that all Albertans and municipalities know and understand is that 40%, yes, 40% of the outstanding taxes are actually owed by companies that continue to operate today on the landscape. So I know we know we're not going to collect all of it, but there is an opportunity here to collect a significant chunk. And obviously, money that is collected is going to go and be put right back into the communities where it's come from and where it's needed. You and I have chatted a few times this year since January about our infrastructure deficits. So we will be watching and holding the province's feet to the fire on this one.
Okay, and maybe if I can just pick up on that. How much then of a turning point are you at with an issue that has lingered for several years? You and I have talked about it. I've talked with many of your predecessors about it in the past. It's one that has had significant financial impact. Last time you were on, we discussed the infrastructure deficit of $35 billion this year alone.
Absolutely. And I think what's different this time is the recommendations will give the AER the clear power, and I think you've heard the minister use the line, actual teeth to take enforcement action on the basis of unpaid taxes. It's going to enhance industry and the regulators' transparency on how tax payment is used to inform regulation and enforcement and improve gathering and sharing of unpaid tax data. So I think this is really key, something that we haven't had in the past. And we will be waiting to see. Like we said, this is recommendation stage right now. But that being said, the province was at the table for every second of the work that was being done. So we know that we have buy-in there. We will be following up with Municipal Affairs as well as the Energy Ministry probably next week to see what the clear path is moving forward and hopefully have some timelines in place to get this moving forward sooner than later so that we don't continue to see that unpaid gas tax number continue to climb.
Okay, on a different tax front, the Municipal Affairs Minister told your convention this week legislation is on the way, allowing municipalities to highlight on tax notices the amount going to the federal government for RCMP policing costs. How important is this to your membership?
It is extremely helpful. This was one of the big topics at convention this week. So what it's going to allow us to do is to put a clear line item and a potential requisition. It's going to make it more transparent to residents and taxpayers, especially related to the large portion that the municipalities are forced to collect for the province. It's going to be helpful, but that being said, it doesn't address the broader download that the police funding model is doing and showing to municipalities. So we will be continuing to push on that one. We are seeing massive increases. I think we've talked about this already. As municipalities are heading into final budgets, we have to have everything in place and approved, actually coming up here in less than a month. So it will be front and center, and be prepared. Municipalities are going to have some really difficult conversations. We didn't know what the police number was prior to having our interim budgets legislated to be passed by December 31st. We found out on the 18th of December what the numbers were, so it didn't give us a chance to implement them within our budgets. Yes, we knew there was an increase coming, but we had absolutely no idea how much it was. That being said, you will have municipalities contemplating increase to their mill rate on their municipal portion, cut to services, or just an outright cut to projects that are needed within the community.
All right, we're almost out of time. I want to squeeze one more quick one in, though, because I know you heard from the Premier. You also heard from the federal MP and Cabinet Minister Eleanor Olszewski. Tim Uppal, a Conservative MP as well, was there. What's your sense for how those relations went?
It was excellent. The Premier was welcomed warmly by our crowd, as she always is. And it was a unique twist this time at our spring convention, having both the sitting party as well as the federal opposition were there. Our members are always professional. We're always welcoming. And it was definitely the treatment that we've seen to both federal parties that they received. And it's great anytime that we can hear a message directly from Ottawa. It means a lot to our members. And I think it's also important to realize too, as well, is that our members are nonpartisan, and so is our organization. So it is open. It's great to have those open, frank conversations whenever we can.
All right, we're clear out of time. Appreciate yours, Councillor Westerland. Thank you.
Thank you.
From provincial restrictions for medical assistance in dying to the Premier under pressure for travel on a private plane and plans to make oil companies pay their property taxes. Time now for tonight's politics panel. And joining us this evening, Mark McQuaig-Boyd, former MLA and Cabinet Minister, and Laurie Williams, political scientist at Mount Royal University. Good evening to you both. And let's begin with the Smith government's preemptive move to restrict eligibility for medical assistance in dying.
Eligibility is widening, while the guardrails and oversight are weakening. The way Alberta sees it, these escalating factors put the safety and well-being of vulnerable individuals at far too grave a risk.
MAID is a choice eligible Canadians have had for nearly a decade, available to consenting adults in an advanced state of serious and incurable illness that will lead to death. With the federal government planning to expand access, Alberta's government now introducing legislation that would allow doctors and health facilities to refuse access or provide MAID, restrict health workers from initiating conversations with patients about MAID, and limit it to those whose death is foreseeable in the next 12 months. It would also prohibit those whose sole condition is mental illness, which is something Ottawa planning to allow next year. Mark, how does this land as legislation? How much of a lane do you see the Smith government having here?
Well, I frankly, I think she's out of her lane. Everything needed for MAID is outlined in federal legislation now, and she refers to more people using it, but we have to remember we have a boomer population that's getting older, so more people will be using it. So I think when she talks about some of the reasons and people are availing themselves of it, I think she needs to fix her system to provide more supports rather than concentrate on this matter. But I guess it remains to be seen how it goes.
Laurie, how much of a potential collision course does this put Alberta on with the federal government, given the feds legalized MAID a decade ago and that it exists as a carve-out from criminal law?
Well, right. Criminal law, of course, is federal jurisdiction, but healthcare is provincial, and so I think the collision is not going to be primarily between governments. I think it'll be a matter that's dealt with before the courts. Now, this is a complicated matter. There are some people that are concerned that access is going to be provided in areas that are quite controversial. And we're hearing from some people who are advocates for folks with mental illness who oppose access for mental illness, some advocates for mental illness who do want access for mental illness. I think all of those, are certainly places where there can be conversations and discussions. There are a couple bits of this that I don't quite get. One is that a family member has to be present as it's administered. And I don't know how that respects the autonomy and rights of the folks who might want to avail themselves of this service. But Mark's got a really good point, and this has to be the emphasis. If people are looking for medical assistance in dying because life is intolerable for them, because they cannot get the supports and services that they need, then the problem is not to stop them from getting access to medical assistance in dying. The solution is to give them the supports and the services they need to make their lives worth living.
Mark, to pick up on Laurie's point about the prospect of an eventual court challenge, does there then come a point where the notwithstanding clause enters the equation?
Yes, I imagine she could use that. She certainly used it freely in other matters, but I think the biggest point for her should be fix the system, provide more supports, and maybe there'll be less people who feel hopeless and see MAID as their only option. I think right now what she's doing is a huge disrespect to the doctors who are trying to do the right thing. I agree with Laurie. What do families do if they have no loved one that's willing to be with them at that time? What happens to them? So I think it is a very complex issue. I guarantee it will be in the courts, and I guess we'll see what happens from there.
All right. Next up, the Premier facing accusations of entitlement for use of a private jet courtesy of the Saudi government. The flights came to light during a committee hearing Tuesday when NDP leader Naheed Nenshi asked about missing receipts for a leg of Danielle Smith's trip to the Middle East last year.
They provided the accommodation. It was approved by the Ethics Commissioner in advance. When it came to the flight that we took, it was a private plane, non-commercial aircraft. It was proposed by the government of Saudi Arabia in order to enable efficient movement around the country, including to locations with limited commercial airline services.
The Premier and members of her staff traveled to Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates in the fall. Danielle Smith says she bonded with the Saudi energy minister over their shared goal of reducing poverty and emissions while ensuring energy security. The opposition says the trip cost Alberta taxpayers $64,000 and questions the appropriateness of the separate Saudi flights. Laurie, this also carried over into question period in the legislature this week, became quite heated. How much of an argument do you see here for the label of entitlement, especially if it was cleared by the Ethics Commissioner?
For the hotel stays was cleared by the Ethics Commissioner. I'm not sure if clearance was achieved for the flight. So there might be ethical concerns there and questions about whether this might have been an attempt to get return favors for the favor given. And so those are questions that need to be answered. But the other thing is just the expenditure. Is this going to generate value for money for Alberta? And those are legitimate questions to raise. And I think it's possible that good answers could be given to those questions. But at a time when a lot of Albertans are struggling with affordability, and taxes are one of the things that they have to think about, and particularly in places that now have higher property taxes because of the provincial government's policies. This is going to be a question that Albertans want answers to.
Marg, what's to be made of the opposition's attempt to score some points at a time when, according to the latest polling from Angus Reid, Danielle Smith's approval rating is at 46%. That's up 2 points, despite the government recently projecting a budget deficit of more than $9 billion.
Well, I think the opposition's doing what the opposition should do, is pointing out areas where there's questions and holding the government to account. In this case, just because you can do it based on the rules you've created doesn't mean you should. There's certainly a view of perception. And, as Laurie said, people are struggling right now. And to watch the Premier at a time when the teachers were striking and there was a back-to-work law put in place for what appears to be a bit of a vanity trip, I think there's good need to ask questions. And, the role of the Ethics Commissioner is to provide advice, and keep politicians out of trouble, just as this is starting to appear they will be in some trouble for.
All right, time for us to take a bit of a break. But when we come back, rural municipalities in the plan to deal with oil and gas companies not paying their property taxes. More from our politics panel in a moment. Welcome back. We heard from Kara Westerland, president of the Rural Municipalities of Alberta, off the top this evening, following up on notable developments from the RMA's Spring Convention this week. Marg, one of those key developments was the joint report with the provincial government with recommendations for cracking down on future instances of oil and gas companies not paying their property taxes. As a former Alberta energy minister, how far do you see this plan moving the needle in reining in those delinquent operations?
Well, I hope it does. I think we're at a point now where we see where landowners are pretty fed up with not being paid. Municipalities are pretty fed up with not being paid. And we're in a time when all the companies are making good money with the prices. So, if a company's in arrears, they should be doing like anybody else does and talk to the municipalities and make a plan to pay that in payments or whatever. In my view, I think the government and the AR has to be stricter on these companies who are not doing their duty and making all companies look bad. And to be clear, there are lots of companies that do pay, but the municipalities know who they are, and I think they should be called to task on this.
Laurie, the recommendations, they're not binding, and the Municipal Affairs Minister has said many of the changes they'll come through ministerial orders, regulatory changes. What's to be made of the position this will now leave rural municipalities in? The degree of control they have here?
Well, it remains to be seen what actually this results in, whether it works, whether it makes a difference. And I think to some degree this is a response to the fact that rural municipalities are really struggling. They're not getting the tax revenue. They're not getting some of the monies they used to get from the provincial government. They're being asked to pay more to the provincial government through that increase in property taxes, the third increase in property taxes that's occurred under the UCP since 2019. And so they're really squeezed. We also know that they're struggling with worse access to health care. There are a lot of questions and concerns in rural Alberta that are raising questions about whether this government is serving them as they would expect. And I think this is a move in a more positive direction. The government's taking seriously at least one of the concerns that's being raised by rural municipalities. And the proof will be in whether or not it actually makes a difference, whether those revenues, whether those taxes actually start to get paid. And it helps some of these rural municipalities that are struggling with their finances.
Well, and Mark, there's still the matter of roughly $250 million worth of unpaid property taxes over the years, which the government says are likely unrecoverable. Should municipalities just accept that as, that money's long gone?
No, I don't think they should accept it. And I don't know that taxpayers should be covering for this. If companies have been bought and sold there's certainly a number that could be held to account, because when you buy a company, you assume their debts and that. But there's probably going to be some that can't be recovered. But I think this has to be a joint effort and a real push to companies who are making profits on these days to start paying their bills.
Laurie, a number of issues and topics addressed during the RMA's spring convention this week. What's to be made of the one point the government signaling new legislation will allow municipalities to highlight on their tax notices how much is going to Ottawa for RCMP services?
Fair enough. Let's see what's being paid for policing currently, but let's also look at what would be paid for policing if a shift were made. What would be the impact on the quality of policing services? What about integration between the police here and other parts of the country and the ability to deal with some criminal activities that cross provincial borders? I think if you're going to be highlighting what money is going to Ottawa for this or that service, you should perhaps also be highlighting what money is going to the provincial government, for example, in property taxes and the increases there. I don't know that the finger pointing at Ottawa is necessarily the best approach. I mean, this is similar to what we talked about earlier. A better approach might be to actually provide better services, provide more effective policing in rural municipalities at a price that is stable and predictable for municipalities. And we know that rural municipalities do not currently want to shift to the RCMP. They're worried about the cost that might be associated with it and whether it would be as effective or as well integrated into the national policing system. Those are the questions that need to be answered, not how much money is going to pay for the RCMP currently. What would it cost if the shift were made, and what value for money would people be getting?
Mark, how does this tax notice element play at a time, post-budget, when some municipalities are leveling criticism at the provincial government for having to collect the government's education property tax?
Yeah, absolutely. I agree 100% with Laurie. Be upfront, be transparent, look at the costs. People don't like paying taxes at the best of times, and they're going to want to know this, and they're going to have questions. And to me, this does look like another bun fight with Ottawa rather than what's going to be good. And I mean, any politician, any time, and any premier, any time, should be putting in front what is the best value for the dollar spent for Albertans. And this is no exception.
Laurie, last 30 seconds to you, this tax notice change. How do you see it playing into the Smith government's continued push to build out a provincial police service, one that could ultimately replace the RCMP?
Well, it might be one sort of arrow in their quiver to try to push things in the direction that they want. But let's remember, the polls, even the Alberta Next panel results indicated that rural municipalities don't want to move away. Most of them don't want to move away from the RCMP. This grassroots democracy government isn't listening to what rural municipalities are saying, and it continues to try to push in the direction of convincing people that their solution is better. A better expenditure of time and money would be on actually showing what they could do to make things better, how a provincial police force would be more effective, more cost-effective in particular, and also how it would integrate into the national system. For those who are familiar with provincial policing in other provinces and some of the problems that have occurred as a result of that, a really clear plan of how this would be better than what currently is in place is needed, and not just that it'll be better policing in terms of getting a response to a particular call. Will they be more effective at dealing with crime because of what's happening nationally?
All right, we're out of time. Have to leave it there. Great to see you both. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael.
That is our program for this evening. Remember, you can always have your say. Email us anytime at comments@albertaprimetime.com. Coming up tomorrow, with oil prices rising and global trade in turmoil, we'll find out about a new center of excellence focused on transportation and logistics as a driver of Alberta's economy. That's on Friday. Until then, have a great evening, everyone, from all of us at Alberta Primetime. Thank you for watching, and join us again next time.